Very happy to give this presentation, so thank you for inviting me. It's great to see so many people here as well. So if you have any questions at any stage in the presentation, please feel free to put your hand up or shout out, whatever you prefer. And if I say something you don't agree with, especially, please shout out and tell me I'm wrong, so that'll be fun. So I've had really good critical questions in Spain before. So one of our presentations 15 years ago, I gave what I thought was a really good presentation, and then someone at the back put the hand up and completely destroyed my presentation with a really insightful question that I've not thought of before. So that made it more fun for everyone except me, but that's fine. But I learned from it, so that's good. Okay, so I'm going to talk about large language models for research evaluation today. So I'm going to give some examples of empirical studies to see whether the large language models can do any kind of research evaluation, and then look at the strengths and the weaknesses. So I'm going to start with a small scale study that kind of sets the context for everything, and then I'll go on to a larger scale study, and then other studies that look at either more detail or a different aspect of the issue. So for bibliometrics, we've had 50 years of analysing how well citations can reflect research impact or research quality. And for large language models, we've only had a couple of years to do these kind of studies. So we don't have the answers yet, definitely. But we're making a start, I think, now. So I don't think I need to tell you this, but research evaluation is a very common thing. So whether your job is research evaluation or bibliometrics, or whether you have nothing to do with research evaluation or bibliometrics, if you're an academic, then it does affect you. It probably affects you. So when you apply for a job, the people assessing your application will evaluate the quality of your research, maybe informally, maybe formally, and that will affect whether you get the job. When you apply for promotion, what the people assessing your application think of the quality of your research will affect whether you get promotion or not. So in my department, when anyone applies for a job, then they have to submit their 2 best papers with their CV. So CV, application letter, 2 best papers, and then the 2 best papers are sent to different members of the department, and we have to score them on a 4-point scale. So every month I get a couple of papers to assess. This is for a candidate. Can you give these a score on 1 to 4? And if you don't get a high enough score from the members of the department, then you probably won't get an interview in the school. So it's a formal part of our candidate selection process. And other universities, maybe they don't do it the same way, but they'll have, I'm sure, at least an informal way of assessing whether they think that the publications on the CV are strong enough. But it takes a lot of time. So evaluating research is a slow process, and it has to be done by people that have experience in the field. So you're using up the time and the energy of people who could be doing other things like research or teaching when you're asking them to do research evaluation. So for the many different research evaluation type tasks, a question is often, could we do it more efficiently than by giving it to the busy researchers to do? Could we use bibliometrics, or could we use AI to do it instead of the researchers themselves? So this question gets asked all the time, I'm sure. So some countries in their evaluation systems, they use bibliometrics. I think in Spain, bibliometrics is used quite a lot in kind of the evaluation systems, whereas in the UK, we're quite heavy on the research evaluation by independent experts, but it's very expensive and time-consuming, the UK version. So could we use ChatGPT or the new large language models to do a better job than either the humans or the bibliometrics? Is the question. So first of all, so for the background, just so that we're all, so we all either agree or we all understand what my perspective is. So for research quality, the UK kind of semi-official perspective is that it comprises originality, rigor, and significance. So significance or impact, with the significance or impact being either scholarly or societal, so two types of impact. So in our formal research evaluation exercise that we have every 7 years, this is the official definition: significance, originality, impact, and this is what the scores are given for. So when candidates apply to jobs at Sheffield, this is what I'm asked to score for. Separate score for significance, separate score for originality, separate score for impact out of 4 for the publications. So I have, but this is where you can jump in and say, I disagree. So people come up to me and strongly argue that research quality is citation counts. So specifically, economists and physicists will argue this definition is wrong. Research quality is just citation counts and nothing else, because citation counts are objective. But the consensus, so not everyone agrees, but the majority, is that consensus? Anyway, the majority of times when people put together a definition of research quality, it includes significance, originality in rigour. So there was a study, a Langfeld study, which looked at over 100, I think, definitions of research quality, and they said that the 3 core things were significance, originality and rigour. So this is kind of a fairly standard agreement across science, particularly in the West. So if we look at citations, so long-term citations would represent primarily scholarly impact. So they don't primarily reflect originality, they don't primarily reflect rigour, and they don't even primarily reflect societal impact. So they represent half of one of the 3 dimensions of research quality. So that would be a way of criticising citation analysis from a research quality evaluation perspective. So it doesn't mean that citation counts aren't useful, but it does mean that they're not directly assessing what most definitions of research quality are interested in assessing. Okay, does that make sense? So I've just said it, and I'm not sure it makes sense to me anymore, but okay. So the UK justification for using peer review rather than citation analysis would be that it's only, well, one of the justifications is that it's only peer review that can take into account rigour and originality that goes into the publication and try to guess or estimate the scientific and societal impact of the work when it's published. So we need the experts to do this rather than citations. That's a UK perspective. Okay. No disagreements yet? Okay. So if you're quietly disagreeing, that's fine. Jump in later with your disagreement, no problem at all. Yeah.
Go back. I'm just thinking that there was
Great.
like a step in beside scientific impact and societal is the, like dissemination, because some very good papers with scientific impact, if they do not get properly disseminated, they will never get societal impact.
Okay.
Well, I don't well, of course I totally agree with you, but there's like something in between.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, so dissemination somewhere. So we ought to reward people for good dissemination, shouldn't we, as well? Yeah. Okay, thank you. So a little bit of background about the UK research evaluation process. So I know it's completely different to Spain, but this is the context of the ChatGPT study. So we're getting to ChatGPT next, I promise. So how the UK system works is every 7 years we have to put forward, so every academic researcher has to put forward their best publications over the previous 7 years into a big pool, and then it gets scored on the 1 to 4 scale by independent researchers from other countries, other universities. So there's a panel of just over 1,000 senior researchers that do this assessment, and it takes about a year. So this is a very expensive process. I think it takes £125 million to do the evaluations. But the results direct the block funding for research in the UK, which is about £14 billion. So it's a hugely important financially evaluation, and also for reputation. So if you you get the highest score, your department gets the highest score in the country, then you can boast for 7 years. So it's like major boasting, and it's seen as very important by everyone, and it's a normal source of stress as well by most academics working, because even though it happens every 7 years, as soon as the results are announced, every university starts planning for the next round in 7 years' time. So my university, so the next one is 2028, and I think my university is in the third round of planning for this one for 2028. So we've gone through 3 complete cycles of putting the documentation together. And so we'll probably end up being 6 by the time it actually gets submitted. So enormous, yeah.
Right, and how do you cope with, or how do you consider the quality, quantity, and sometimes problem issue? Some scholars don't start publishing in that 7-year period, and then the evaluation sometimes depends not just on the quality but on the quantity. It's something that the UK is considering, or not a problem in that case.
Okay, oh, thank you, that's a good question. So under the UK system, so under the REF 2021 system, you had to submit an average of 2.5 papers per full-time academic. And each academic had to submit a minimum of 1 and a maximum of 5. So there was a little bit of leeway, but you had to have at least one thing in the 7-year period. Otherwise, you would get a 0 score for that academic. So there's a kind of a minimum of 1, but overall the department aims for at least 2.5. Well, for 2.5 good papers per person. So in my school, it's not really a problem. It's the bigger problem is selecting what we think are the best papers, because nobody agrees. So we have enormous amount of work into everyone reviews everyone else's paper in the department, and then we produce a long list of all the papers everyone's written in the department with 2 or 3 reviews, and then we have to submit the top whatever it is, 2.5%, 2.5 times the number of full-time equivalent academics. So there's a kind of a cut-off score that means that we will submit your paper and we won't. So that's, yeah. But it's a deliberate policy of not encouraging quantity, giving a maximum of 5 per academic. So going back 20 years, it was the opposite. So we had a system that encouraged volume and not quality. And now the system deliberately encourages quality and not volume, subject to the minimum of 1. Thank you. So the assessors, when they evaluate the journal articles, books, other outputs, they are given a guideline. It's about 1.5 pages instructions, which defines research quality and gives examples of what to evaluate for research quality, so rigor, originality, significance, and gives examples. And there are 4 different sets of instructions. So essentially there's one for the health and life sciences, one for the physical sciences and engineering, one for social sciences, and one for arts and humanities. And they're all a little bit different to each other. So it's these guidelines, are given to the experts. So I've given those guidelines to ChatGPT and asked it to do the same job. So this was a nice case where the instructions to the reviewers were public, and so we can ask ChatGPT to do exactly what the humans were asked to do. So I'm going to illustrate first with Library and Information Science, main panel D, which is the arts and humanities. So what I did is I made a customized ChatGPT for main panel D, which is the arts and humanities, and I did it just by uploading the instructions for the human reviewers, and I only changed the first sentence of the instruction. So I changed the first sentence to orient it towards a computer rather than towards a human. That's all I did. But everything else is word for word pretty much the same. And then I entered some of my own articles, and I scored them by myself. I gave my own articles a personal score first, and then I entered them to ChatGPT, and I compared ChatGPT's score with my score to see if it gave the same score or a different score. And then I tried it out with fake articles as well to see whether it could detect Okay, so these are the system instructions for ChatGPT. So if you're a casual user of ChatGPT, you might not know that you can kind of customize it by telling it, giving it what are called system instructions, which essentially tell it how to operate. So that gets you essentially a kind of a different version of ChatGPT that is just customized for this one task. So it's 1.5 pages of A4, these system instructions, and this is what the human evaluators read, apart from the first sentence. So I tell ChatGPT, you are an academic expert, whereas the academic experts don't need to be told that. They already believe that. And yeah. So it explains the quality scoring system, 1, 2, 3, 4 star, and gives a definition of the 4 levels. And then it also defines originality, significance, and rigor. And then the rest of it gives examples of the kind of things that need to be taken into account for significance, originality, rigor. Okay, so lots, yeah, so I won't, so these are the results, okay, so I love complicated graphs, but I'm going to try and explain this graph. So what's going on with this bubble graph? So along the x-axis, these are the 51 of my own articles that I put in, so each here, that's the number of one of my articles, and these are the scores that I've given my articles. So I thought that 2 of my articles were awful, so I gave them the bottom score, 1 star. And then I should really only give them whole numbers, but some I wasn't sure if it was a 1 or a 2, so I gave them 1.5. 3 I gave them a 1.5. Awful, but not completely awful. And then the 2 star, 2.5, 2.75, really on the fence, 3, 3.5, and 4. So these are the ones I'm really boasting about. I think these are my world-leading articles. That's kind of the definition. So, so I'm a big head, a bit boastful, so I've given a lot of them 4 star, more than 1 star. So on the y-axis, these are the scores given by ChatGPT. So it never gave a score lower than 1. So the lowest score it gave was 2, unlike my 1s. And the maximum it gave was 4. And for ChatGPT, I submitted each article 15 times. So I didn't just submit it once, but I submitted it 15 times. So the size of the bubble is proportional to how often ChatGPT gave it that score. So this article, number 2, ChatGPT twice gave it a score of 2 stars, sorry, so the second lowest. And then once it gave it a score of 2.67. Loads of times it gave it a score of 3. So a big bubble for 3. And then I think 1 3.5 and 2 4s. So first of all, ChatGPT didn't always give it the articles the same score. So entering the same article with the same instructions got different answers. Not all the time, but a lot of the time it gave different scores. So most of the time it scored all the articles 3 star, but it did give a range of different scores. So the first question is, does ChatGPT give the articles the same score as me? The answer is no, it doesn't. Most of the time it gives them a different score. So the rectangles show where I agree with ChatGPT. So it's these few articles, we've both given the same score. None of the 2.5s. Some of the 3 stars, one of the 3.5s, and some of the 4s. So some agreement, but most of the time ChatGPT gives it a different score. So first of all, it doesn't agree with me most of the time, but what we can do is see if ChatGPT scores correlate with mine. So does it have a tendency to give higher scores to articles that I give higher scores to? And the answer is yes, the correlation is 0.3, positive 0.3. So it tends to give a slightly higher score to articles that I also give a higher score to. So it's not guessing. But the magic happens when you take the average of the ChatGPT scores. So if you take the average of the 15 ChatGPT scores for each article, then the correlation is 0.5. So that becomes a very respectable correlation. So it has a moderate ability to differentiate between good quality articles and bad quality articles, but only if you average it lots of times. So at least 5 times gets you a correlation of about 0.5. So I did 15, so I've tried 5, 15 and 30. So 5 is kind of the minimum, and this graph shows 15. So if you take the average, so this graph is the same data as the previous graph, but this is the average. And you can see there's an increasing tendency. So each dot is one paper and the average score. So this is my score along the x-axis, and the y-axis is the average ChatGPT score. So you can see there's a tendency for ChatGPT to give higher scores to articles that I also give higher scores to. So, so this is a surprising ability, I think, to estimate the quality of academic research papers.
Right.
Yeah.
Something it just came to my mind now. When you are sometimes assessing someone's paper quality, sometimes I think surnames, affiliation, country of origin may have an impact on that. On finally that the output and the scores that have been decided on. But do you think that if my papers, your papers, you change the surname and you say ChatGPT had my surname is Spanish, do you think the score could be probably poorer?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I don't know. I haven't tested that. So for these papers, this isn't a factor because I wrote them all. So this doesn't explain this result. And for the other studies that I'm going to show, I've taken the author names out. So, so I don't know. I haven't compared what happens if you tell ChatGPT the author names and affiliations compared to if you don't tell it. So I imagine there probably would be a difference, but I haven't tried that yet. But it is possible to take out author names and affiliations and it still works. So it's not, the patterns it finds aren't based on author names and affiliations. Thank you. Okay. So if we did this with bibliometric data instead of ChatGPT, the pattern would be weaker. So for this, ChatGPT is better than bibliometrics for my papers. And in fact, as we'll see later, for most fields, ChatGPT works a bit better than bibliometrics in terms of a stronger association with research quality, so human-judged research quality. So I wanted to find out why it gave, why it could have some ability to detect research quality. So I wondered whether it would really understand the papers. So did it detect the quality of my papers by properly reading them, properly understanding them, or did it somehow guess? So I tried to enter some fake papers into ChatGPT, where if it really understood them, it would either give them a score of 1 or reject them and say this is fake research. So I invented a fake paper, which was a complete paper, but it was about something that any human would know is impossible. It was a paper about squirrel surgeons writing research about squirrel surgeons. So we all know that squirrels, A, aren't surgeons, and B, don't write academic research. But does ChatGPT know? So I put this paper into ChatGPT with the same instructions as before, and it wrote a report on the research. And it was impressed by the fact that it was a comparison of author species doing academic research. It thought, this is really novel, and it gave it a good score. So it rated it as either 3-star or 4-star, depending on which time I entered it. But it never said, this is stupid, or this is fake. So it wasn't able to read this and realise it was fake. And it still wrote it a plausible report. So apart from the squirrel thing, it's a well-structured, well-written report. So every report that's been written by ChatGPT has been well-structured, plausible, well-written. So just this fake thing, it hasn't spotted. So I asked it, do you know that squirrels can't write research articles? So I wondered whether, because it ignored that fact in the previous one, and it gave a perfect answer. So it does know squirrels can't write research, but when I asked it to evaluate a paper about squirrels writing research, then it didn't know anymore. So obviously, so my conclusion from that, so I welcome your alternative conclusion. So my conclusion is that ChatGPT doesn't really understand the paper, It's just making a very clever guess at the score. And it's also very clever at writing the report. So all the reports that it writes. So every time it gives a score, it also writes about a page of report, an A4 page of report about the paper. It gives a summary and then discusses the originality, significance and rigour, and then it gives the score. And all these reports look like they're written by a PhD student level. So they're impressive reports. So I think only 2 of the reports, I've read over 1,000, only 2 of them contain something that is pretty clearly a mistake. And I think if you asked, if you got 1,000 reports from academic experts, you would find at least 2 mistakes in those reports. So it's done incredibly well with the writing report. Okay. But it is still not evaluating. So despite the correlation, it's not evaluating the research. It's doing very clever guesses of the research because it can't spot the squirrel fake. So the next question is it just my papers it works for, or did I cheat by adding the scores after I got ChatGPT? I didn't. I gave the scores before ChatGPT. So I tried it on all academic fields as a larger scale follow-up study. So this is less fun, but bigger graphs and more impressive data. So I took all the, not all, but most of the journal articles submitted to the last UK ref. So over 100,000 journal articles submitted to the last UK ref. And then I got 5 scores for each article using ChatGPT, 2 versions of ChatGPT, 4.0, which at the time I did it was the most expensive version, and then 4.0 mini, which is the cheap free version. And I correlated them not with the scores per paper. So the scores per paper are not published by the UK. They're destroyed, in fact. And what they do publish is the department average scores. So every department gets an average score for its papers. So I'm correlating the ChatGPT scores against the departmental average scores. It's a little bit indirect. So you can't get a perfect correlation of 1 from this. But still a positive correlation means that ChatGPT is doing a better than average job, a better than random job. So this is a ChatGPT 4 and ChatGPT 4.0 and 4.0 mini. So 4.0, the expensive one is the blue dot. A 4.0 mini, the cheap one, is 1/10 of the price, 10% of the price, the red dot. And these are all Spearman correlations. So almost all fields have a fairly substantial, up to moderate correlation with department research quality. So remember, this is kind of an indirect correlation. So this is, the 0.4 is more impressive than it would be for a direct correlation. But in almost all fields, ChatGPT has this ability to detect research quality. So this is pretty convincing evidence, at least from a UK perspective, of its ability to detect research quality. And for these, I didn't even enter the full paper. I entered just the title and the abstract of the paper. So not the full text, just the title and the abstract. So no author information or affiliation information, literally just the title of the paper and the abstract of the paper. So astonishingly, just with that very limited information, it was still able to make impressive positive correlations with the research quality. So it's definitely not evaluating them, it's guessing them, but it still makes good guesses based on this very limited information. So this is, this was totally unexpected. And so this is a comparison of, just one other thing on that last graph. So I did 3 comparisons. So ChatGPT 4.0, the expensive one, the mini one, the cheap one, and then combine them both together. So the highest correlation comes from combining them both together. So the expensive one is slightly better than the cheap one, but not much better, despite being 10 times more expensive. But the best option is to combine them both. 5 iterations. And if you compare the correlations with the equivalent correlations using citation-based indicators, then in most fields, ChatGPT has a higher correlation with the departmental research quality than the citations. So for this one, I've factored out the fact that the correlation is indirect. I've done a little calculation to take into account the maximum possible correlation for the indirect data. So the scale is slightly different. But if you just compare the citation-based one, NLCS, that's the citation score, with ChatGPT. So in most fields, ChatGPT gives a slightly higher correlation, so it's slightly better than citation data. And this is for young citations. This is for include citations that are within, I think, 2 years of publication. And for longer term citations, so mature citations, I think this is at least 5 years from, every paper has at least 5 years of citations, so the citation data is higher quality than the previous graph. ChatGPT, it still gives you a higher correlation in most fields, so it still does better, even than long-term citations. So most fields, ChatGPT outperforms long-term citations, at least with this citation score indicator. So, yeah. So I think it's pretty impressive. So no questions. Stunned silence or falling asleep? I'm not sure. Okay. So, so that's the main evidence. So yeah. So this last slide. So that's the end of the main evidence for the value of ChatGPT as a research assessment. So this is just overall correlation, and then the rest of the slides are either other topics, other evaluations with ChatGPT, or narrower focused investigations of how ChatGPT works or different ways of using it. Okay. So this one is for so using ChatGPT scores to evaluate the quality of academic journals. So instead of the journal impact factor or journal citation rate, any kind of journal, citation-based journal indicator, this takes the average score, average ChatGPT score for the articles in the journal. Okay, so it's kind of a ChatGPT citation rate, not citation, ChatGPT impact factor rather than, in fact, it's a quality factor because ChatGPT doesn't assess impact, it assesses quality, or tries to assess quality. So it's a ChatGPT quality, average quality rate against the journal citation rate. And you can see from the kind of linear-ish pattern, you get similar results. So you get similar ranking, not the same, but similar. And if you look at the journals that get higher, so the journals below the kind of the imaginary straight line down the middle, below it will get better score from ChatGPT. Like evidence-based library and information practice, ChatGPT thinks it is better than its citation rate, it says. And this one, ChatGPT thinks it's better than its citation rate, it says. And you can find reasons for these. So this one's, for example, this one's a conference proceeding, so the citations probably go to the journal articles based on the conference paper. So it kind of makes sense, even the outliers kind of make sense for this. Yeah.
Which is the correlation of the graph?
Yeah, it's quite a high one. I forget exactly what the score is, 0.8, 0.9, something like that. Yeah, pretty high score. Sorry, I've forgotten the exact number. Should have put it on the slide, sorry. So these are articles, journals that have at least 250, I think, journal articles in Scopus over the 5-year period for this. So an advantage of ChatGPT scores is that over citations is that you can calculate them immediately. As soon as a paper is published, you can calculate its ChatGPT score. Whereas for the journal impact factor, for example, it's based on articles published the previous 2 years. And even that's a bit young for citation data. So you have to, so the journal impact factor for 2025 reflects the impact of work published in 2024 and 2023. Have I got that right? So it's previous 2 years' work, whereas ChatGPT quality factor would be this year's work. This graph shows the citation rate against ChatGPT score for the articles in the Library and Information Science journals. And you can see that most of the scores are between 2 and 3 1/3. So ChatGPT doesn't really go for the high scores so much. It has a few of the high scores and a few of the lower scores, but it's, for our field, it focuses between 2 and 3 1/3. So for medicine, it goes higher up to the 4. There are more clustered around the 4. So it does have field averages. And these are themes that ChatGPT doesn't like in our field. So these are things that you'll get a lower score for if you mention them in your abstract in our field. So in the ChatGPT, so there's all of these are also less cited. So they're both lower ChatGPT score and less cited if you have these words in your abstract. And the brackets mean that it's less prominent. So books and print get much less cited, and they're also, but they're more less cited than they are lower scored by ChatGPT. But ChatGPT still scores them lower. So if you're doing this research now, stop it.
It's a tragedy. You cite books and reading.
Yeah.
And you will get.
Yeah. Thumbs down from ChatGPT.
Yeah. Civilization.
So that's a huge bias. There's lots of research which just does questionnaires or these sort of things, and that is very biased.
Yeah. So I don't know the reason why yet. So this is just kind of numerical data, but I don't know. So it could be that A, it's biased and it doesn't know how to evaluate this kind of research, or it could be that this research is on average lower quality. So it might be that there's the kind of mainstream research, for example, on education. It might be the mainstream research on library and information science education is perfectly fine, but there's a minority of research which isn't good because it's by people that don't have experience in education but have had to write a paper, and they do teaching, so they've written a paper on teaching. So looking at my career, I've written bad papers on maths teaching based on my teaching. So that's why I think, okay, maybe education is in there because people have been kind of forced to write papers on something that they're not really expert on. And that kind of brings down the average. So the mainstream papers might be completely fine, but the average is brought down by some kind of pollution and some not good papers. I don't know. That's just speculation.
Yeah, it's very interesting because most of us want to research and also teach, and there's lots of people who are just doing education. That means that educational papers are not good.
Yeah.
That's huge, right? That's quite revealing because it means that we can't do anything to improve teaching, education, students, etc. So that's really, really quite controversial, right?
Okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's a good point. I've not thought of that before. You're destroying my presentation. No, I love your point.
I don't know anything about education, but I know that lots of scholars do education. So your example of maths or physics or literature or language, etc. Actually, universities are here not just to produce knowledge, to guide students, and to teach them sort of how to educate others. So that's a big problem. That means that university papers are so bad they don't teach anything, so we are not doing anything regarding education, which is basically one of our goals. So it's quite, it's very interesting, because I thought that myself, that's my bias. I think that education papers are not good, and that is a problem in my case and ChatGPT, so we are biased. Both of us, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It is an issue.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess the more general point is, it's kind of helpful. It's helpful to have a table like this to kind of spark these kind of discussions. So you have to take this with English expression, pinch of salt. You have to take this like, okay, this is what ChatGPT says. That's not the truth, because ChatGPT is the same one that hallucinates. So, we're not going to trust it completely. But at least you can have a conversation about this in a way that you might not be brave enough to if you only had citation data. because it's easy to explain away low citation count. So yeah. So whether hopefully the discussion is helpful, but don't go away and tell people you're doing bad research because it's education and ChatGPT says it's rubbish. So that would be the wrong conclusion. Okay, so happy days on to the things that ChatGPT and citations like. So ChatGPT likes the word novel in your abstract, surprisingly, since that's part of its definition. But apart from that, almost everything that ChatGPT likes is also more cited in our field. Yeah. And one thing that's more cited but not liked by ChatGPT is adoption, which is a weird one. So they're both like theory, and they're both like experiments. So they're like, and ChatGPT particularly likes a combination of theory and experimental data. So, yeah.
You have this bias, then qualitative versus quantitative, you know, the humanities versus the sort of hard sciences. I can see clearly that.
Yeah. Yeah,
and discussion that imply like controversial approaches with this however, etc. And the idea that you are like doing something obviously experimental, technical, but methodology is really relevant and the methodology is explained quite thoroughly. So the bias there, which is society's bias, the humanities aren't important and don't have any impact. The sciences they do have. So it's quite interesting, by the way. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, so I think my own research, I don't usually include theory, so I think ChatGPT won't like my research as much as it should do, because I don't include theory. So bibliometric research, I think we rarely include theories. So I think the whole area will get kind of downgraded by ChatGPT, because it's asked to look for theory, it's asked to look for like the radical contributions in the details. And that's probably also the case for the human reviewers who assess my work in the ref, because they come from library and information science, but also communication studies, where theory is king. So if I get communication studies assessing my work in the ref, then they might say the same thing as ChatGPT. There's no theory, so it's not very good research. So it's a perspective anyway. Okay. Yeah, so coming back to, is ChatGPT really evaluating the articles? So, in fact, it turns out that it guesses the score better if you only give it the title and the abstract rather than the full text. So I tried giving it the same articles, the full text, or just the abstracts, and the correlation with the human scores, my scores, for the 51 papers was higher if it was just given the title and abstract. And that's despite the fact that it makes clear mistakes in its evaluations of the title and abstract, in the sense of it will say this paper, in its evaluation of rigour, it will say the paper didn't report the sample size or the procedures taken to minimise bias based on the abstract, whereas the full paper did say that. So it hasn't read the full paper, it hasn't been given the full paper, and it hasn't kind of searched the web and found the full paper, and it makes an incorrect evaluation based on the title and abstract. And it's told you just have the title and the abstract, so it knows it doesn't have the full paper. So it shouldn't say you haven't given this information, because it knows it doesn't have the full text, but it will still say that. But despite that, despite making obvious mistakes, okay, very rarely obvious mistakes, but it does make them, it still gives better scores overall just on the title and abstract. And I think it's because the full text confuses it. So there's so much information in the full text that it gets confused, whereas the abstract kind of really condenses the value of a paper, so it can make a better guess from the abstract than from really reading the full text. Yeah.
Do experts read the whole paper? Because just imagine that the first impression is the abstract, so the evaluator, the expert, will evaluate the full paper mainly focused on the abstract. Is that this first impression that you get and then probably the experts do not read the full paper. If they've got like a burden, administrative burden, academic and all that, they will not read the full paper, I don't know.
Yeah, so that's a good point. So the official UK position for the ref is that yes, every expert reads the full paper and reads it carefully and closely before they make their decision. So that's the official point. But your point got a laugh, and there is a joke in the UK, to read a paper like a ref evaluator is a joke, meaning you don't read the paper, you just skim read it or look at the abstract. But I think you're right, yeah, depending on the expert, a lot of experts would just read the title and abstract and maybe skim the rest to give their grade. And certainly when I review a paper for a journal, I have an opinion about the paper after reading the title and abstract. So that probably skews my reading of the rest of the paper. So the title and abstract would be an important thing for me, even reading the full paper. So more hallucinations from more examples of ChatGPT giving the wrong score. So you can feed it in with a URL, not the article or the title and abstract, not the full text or the title and abstract. You can just give it a URL and it will give a score. But if you give it a URL that doesn't exist, it will still write a report, or it can still write a report. A reasonable report, a surprisingly detailed report for a page that doesn't exist. So this URL at the top, I've made that up, so the page doesn't exist at all. So everything it's written in here is completely imaginary. So it's like the model achieves a 90% accuracy on both training and test data. The page doesn't exist, there's nothing there. So it's totally hallucinated, this.
Yeah, actually about this, I recently read an experience by a literature writer, and she asked ChatGPT to rate her writings, and she gave her real URLs. And ChatGPT gave a score and even a review. But actually, it was all invented, it was all fake, because the topic wasn't actually the topic of the writings. So it wasn't actually reading, it wasn't actually going to the text and reading the content. It was just generating a fake review. So even when the URL is real, it might not go there for real.
Thank you. Wow. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so that's a good point. So I have to pay for every query I send to ChatGPT, and you pay for the length of the text. So I experimented with just giving it a URL to see if I could save a lot of money by not uploading the full text or the type and abstract. But as I learned, it said it doesn't work. So even for real papers, it doesn't work. So so more evidence that you don't accept the score at face value. So more aspects of the report from that one. Okay, so some bias tests on the results. So I looked to see if there are any biases in the ChatGPT scores from the results. So I did a regression approach to try to identify biases. So this is based on articles, title and abstract without any author information or affiliation information. Literally just the title and abstract, not the journal either. So ChatGPT hasn't been given anything that it could obviously make biased conclusions from, although it might kind of find them on the web if it wanted to. But it still has a length bias at the top. So near the top. So the longer the title and abstract, the higher the score on average. And it tends to give higher scores for some countries than others. So Spain is in a good corner. So it tends to get higher than average scores if one of the authors first author is from Spain. Sorry. So I don't know if these are biases or these reflect the actual quality of the article. So, but it's just a disparity. And so if we add the journal citation rate, so JNLCS at the top, journal citation rate, then most of the advantage of a longer title and abstract disappears. So this is the same regression, but with the journal impact. So if you publish your article in a journal with a higher impact factor, ChatGPT will tend to give it a higher score. And most of the reason why longer titles and abstracts get you a higher ChatGPT score is associated with the journal. So it's the higher impact factor journals tend to allow longer abstracts, have a longer maximum limits on their abstracts. So that's what's going on there. So the error bars cover all the 26 Scopus different fields, so depending on which field you might have a disadvantage or advantage for Spain. And this is explicitly to compare citation rates. So NLCS is the citation rate for the article. So we've got the article citation rate in here. So these are things that, so even taking into account the citation rate, Spain is liked by ChatGPT. So these countries, these are all advantages after taking into account the citation rate. So this is kind of the extra bonus you get from ChatGPT, even taking into account the citation rate of the article. So I've called this bias, but it's disparity really. So it's not necessarily that it's ChatGPT is doing a bad job, so it could also be reflecting the actual state. So, I don't know. Okay, so the next bit's a bit technical. Do you want me to stop now or go on with I'll go on with the technical bit because no one's asleep yet. So the technical bit. So we've used the average of 5, 15 or 30 ChatGPT scores per paper. So that's what we're using, not a single score, but the average of multiple scores from ChatGPT. So I thought, well, why don't I ask ChatGPT how confident it is about its score? So instead of asking it 5 times, what score would you give this article? I'll ask it once, what score would you give this article? What is the chance you'll give it a 1 star? What's the chance you'll give it a 2 star? What's the chance you'll give it a 3 star? What's the chance you'll give it a 4 star? And then take the weighted average of those. So this is the prompt. So I'm asking it to say what's the percentage chance you'll give it each of these scores, and to see if that is a way of just asking it once instead of 5 times. Okay. And then the second approach, so this is the technical bit, so the second approach is when ChatGPT writes this response, you can ask it for every token in its output. A token is kind of a few characters, sometimes 1 character, sometimes a few consecutive characters, but it's its minimum unit of thinking is the token for ChatGPT. You can ask it for every token, okay, you gave it this token, how likely it was that you would have given it a different token to that one. And if you find the score token in the ChatGPT output, you can see, say it gives it a 3, you can ask it how likely is it that you would have given a 4, a 2 or a 1 instead. So this is what it looks like in the code, so this is for the computer programmers. So here when it reports the actual score is a 3, we can see this is the log probability of the 3, and it also gives the log probability, which is the chance of it giving a 3. So it also reports the chance it have given a 2 instead, or a 4 instead, or a 1 instead. So from these probabilities in its output, we can work out in the long run, how often would it give a 4, a 3, a 2 or a 1? So instead of asking it 5 times or 30 times what score it would give, we can ask it once and then calculate the probabilities. So we're not asking it what its probabilities are, we're just asking it what the model says the probabilities are. So it's not doing any extra work. Anyway, so this graph shows that the first approach, asking it explicitly how likely it is you would give the different scores, doesn't work at all. It's the worst approach of any approach I've tried. So if you ask it how likely it is you'll give these different scores, it doesn't know. So the correlation is still generally positive, but very weaker than all the other approaches I've tried. So yeah, but if you look at the probabilities, reported by the model, then that's the best approach of all the approaches I've tried. So if you, so its model probabilities, so its internal likelihood of saying something is the best indicator so far of what scores it could give to the article. So does that make sense? So if you, yeah, so if I ask you, so I give you one of my papers and say, give it a score. So I could ask you, what's your score? And you might say, that's a 1 star, it's a terrible paper, Mike. And then I could ask you, what's the chance you would you would have given it a 2 star, a 3 star, and a 4 star? And you might say, well, it's 90% certain it's 1 star, but maybe 5% certain it could have been a 2 star, and maybe 3 and 2% that it could be a 3 star or a 4 star. So that would be the first method. But if I could use a brain scanner and look inside your brain, and when you said it's a 1 star paper, and my brain scanner said, well, the neurons say that you could have quite easily said it's actually a 3 star paper, and there was a 5% chance you said it was a 3 star paper, then looking inside your brain, that's the second option that works a bit better. So looking inside ChatGPT's brain is the option that works better than asking it to say what it thinks.
I have a question, because if you ask it this kind of question, you're assuming that the system is able to think about how it works.
Yeah.
How do you know this? And why couldn't it be that it's just saying stuff, just working as it works? Because I don't know whether the system is able to think about its own computation and give you this kind of function.
Yeah, that's a tricky question. Yeah, so other studies that have asked ChatGPT to report its confidence has found it isn't very good either. So it's not, so it has some ability to self-report how accurate its assessment. So if you ask it a simple question and it gives you an answer, you can then follow up the question by saying how certain you are of this answer, and then it'll give you a number, and that number's not very reliable. Yeah, so previous studies have showed. So for this, the table I asked it for, the fact that didn't work very well is kind of not surprising in that context. Yeah, but I guess my intuition was that it might work, because I'm impressed with lots of things that it does. So I didn't want to assume that it didn't work without trying. But I was still really disappointed that it didn't work. Didn't work at all. Yeah.
This reminds me of a TV show, one way, robots in the Wild West, I don't know if you've seen it, they have an analysis mode, and you can ask the robot, why has it given an answer? Because they have this kind of mode, an analysis mode, and they answer why they have responded something before. But I don't know if ChatGPT has this ability. That's why I asked.
Yeah. So I wonder if it'll get better in the future. So the more reasoning models. I haven't tried the more clever reasoning models, so yeah. So I don't know. Yeah.
Does ChatGPT give the score comparing it with other papers within the same field? Because the human will normally give the mark and score depending on the other similar papers that have been submitted, for example, for a journal, or have been somewhere within the same field. Does it take into account the context?
No, it doesn't. So that's in our plan of work to do in maybe about November. So we're going to give it some examples of papers with scores, and then ask it, based on these examples, how would you score this new paper? So at the moment, each paper is submitted completely independently of all the others, and then we ask it for a score. But it ought to use a wider range of scores at least if we give it some examples of papers with different scores, so it would have some ability. So what we can't really do is put all the papers in and ask it to score them all at once, because that's just too much information for it. So we can only feed it one at a time, but we can, by showing it other scores, we can hope that it references its score against other papers with similar scores. But it's quite tricky to do that. But yeah, so I don't know if it'll work or not, but we're going to have a go. Thank you. Okay, so I think I'll stop there before it's too long. So thank you very much for listening. And thank you very much for the questions as well. So any follow-up questions? I haven't talked about the systemic effects of if this was to be used in the research evaluation perspective, or the negative, the downsides of using this in any of the research evaluation, which are major downsides. So I've kind of focused on the evidence and not the interpretation in a real-world context of the evidence. So please feel free to make very critical points about that or questions about that. Please. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your enlightening talk. I was wondering, when you were talking about themes that are liked and disliked by ChatGPT, one of the things that were liked was empiricism, or mentions of empirical studies and the use of actual data, isn't it? But then, in the previous slide, one of the things that were disliked was the use of past tense as a style. And it's my impression that usually when we are reporting data at length, we use past tense. Because maybe it's because it's abstracts that are usually used in abstract. We don't sometimes use that kind of historical present tense. But I was wondering, because there was also a correlation of longer abstracts, possibly, with a higher ranking in terms of quality. Probably in longer abstracts, there is a chance that you can report at length. And usually that reporting tends to be in the past tense most of the times, or in some disciplines it is. Do you have any thoughts of why would that be the case? And also following up, or piggybacking on your last comment, if you think that that's going to have any impact on the way that we write, the actual style of writing our research. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, that's an interesting question. So I don't know for sure, but my current guess is that the reason why past tense tends to get a lower score and less citations, and present tense and also the we tends to get the word we tend to get a higher score, more citations, is that it's a style more used in the medical-oriented papers. So if you read like prestigious medical journals, it's always, as far as I know, it's always we, and I think it's in the present tense as well. So there's kind of a medical style which associates with prestigious publications. So the fact that ChatGPT's picked it up for library and information science, so it could be that it's giving higher scores to the medical papers, and that's a side effect. Or it could be that the people that are able to get papers published in medical papers and have picked up the medical style tend to get higher scores. Or it could be that people, read these papers and are impressed with them, and then try to imitate their style. So I think it might be one of those. So we've done a similar analysis on the human evaluations of the ref, and we also found that human evaluators gave higher scores to abstracts containing the word we, bizarrely. So this was a really strange finding, but that was because of they were more likely to be medical papers. Yeah, thank you.
Another question is that you said you use the abstracts to evaluate the quality, or ask it to evaluate the quality. In library information science, we think a lot about how to write abstract. So I was thinking whether it would be interesting to take an abstract and generate different versions of the same abstract in different styles, but giving the same information, the same content, and check whether the results are the same. The results of the evaluation are the same. And that's one suggestion. And I also have a technical question. I wanted to know, I think you probably have been using the ChatGPT API, but I don't know if using the API, if you give, every time you give a query, you submit a query, I don't know if it remembers the previous queries that you have submitted and whether that might have an influence on the results of the following queries.
Thank you. So second question first. So with the API, it doesn't. So with the API, it promises to forget everything you give it immediately. So there's, and every query I send it is in a separate session, so there shouldn't be any interference. But in the web interface, if you do it, then it does remember. So this was a mistake when I did the first study. The mistake, one of the many mistakes I made was I uploaded the papers consecutively in one session, and it was, although I told it, now evaluate this paper, now evaluate this paper, because I hadn't reset the session, the scores didn't tend to change between papers. So when I put all the data into a massive spreadsheet, then I saw the numbers were kind of changing at the start, and then after about the fourth one, they never changed again. So I realised, okay, it's learning, and yeah, so it is interfering. But once I started a new session each time, then in the web interface, the same thing didn't happen. So even in the web interface, as long as you start a new session, it doesn't seem to learn from the previous scores. And in the API interface, it promises not to. Yeah. So what was the first?
About the different styles of the same answer.
Oh, yeah, that's a really good idea, yeah. So I did try, just before I submitted a paper, I did try to think, put the abstract into ChatGPT, and I asked it, please rewrite this abstract so that if you evaluated it, you would give this article a 4-star. So I rewrote the abstract, and then I put that back into ChatGPT, and I asked it, what score rating would you give to this abstract? And it said 3-star. Yeah, I don't know if it'll work with ChatGPT, so it'd be definitely interesting to try. So ChatGPT should be clever enough at language comprehension that if it's the same information, expressed in a different way, then it should give the same score. But on the other hand, it must make an influence if you include words like, if you explicitly state the novelty, the rigor, and the impact, then surely that would influence it because it's looking for those. So yeah, so I think you could write your abstracts in a way that kind of more targets what ChatGPT is looking for. But to be honest, we're already doing that in the UK. So at Sheffield, we have lessons on how to write your abstract to get a high score, not from ChatGPT, but for the UK ref assessors that will be looking for originality, rigor, and significance. And we specifically focus on writing the abstract to highlight that, as well as the rest of the article, but writing the abstract. So yeah, so it would be a bad thing if academics spend ages trying to customize their academic. There are abstracts for ChatGPT, especially if it was in a way that didn't help humans. But yeah, so we need to do the study to find out how influential it is. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much again. I think you can hear me anyways. I'm really grateful for this presentation for different reasons. First of all, because you've done you've tested the capacity of ChatGPT, and that's very important because we are using it. Secondly, because your picture of the sort of different disciplines that most of us may be working on is quite clear. It's very interesting to see how it assesses, or she assesses, or he assesses research, and it's beautiful how you presented that information. Thirdly, because in line with what's been said before, perhaps we should teach or we should learn to write abstract. It is something that just experts pay attention to, and ChatGPT too. And obviously, if we have to learn to write abstract, we should also learn to write titles. Now that this is my assessment of your beautiful presentation, I should ask you whether, now that the government, perhaps the UK government, asks you to do some assessment of these papers in this 7-year period, will you use it after you have discovered all these issues regarding biases, etc.? Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm talking with the people that are running the REF, the next REF 2028. So it will be a human evaluation, and it won't use ChatGPT, but they are going to have promised to run a pilot exercise of using ChatGPT to see what would have happened if we had used the ChatGPT scores, not to replace the humans, but to support the humans. So at the moment in the UK, in I think 11 of the 34 fields that we assess, units of assessment they're called, they have bibliometric indicators to support their assessment, but they use them like they say it influences about 5% of the judgment. So it's 95% human, 5% bibliometric. So the suggestion is that ChatGPT could be either replacing the bibliometrics, but more likely alongside the bibliometrics. So you can have a ChatGPT estimate as well as a bibliometric estimate. And the reviewers would turn to this if they weren't sure. So, the big problem with our REF, one of the big problems with our REF process is that we have a fixed pool of 1,000 evaluators. And if none of the 1,000 understand the research, then they have to guess the score. So the ChatGPT and bibliometrics kind of have their biggest value for the papers that the experts don't understand. So they have to make a guess, and a bibliometric-informed guess or a ChatGPT-informed guess is better than a pure guess. So but that will be 2035 before it actually gets in, because we're super, super slow and cautious. Yeah.
Thank you so much. My question is related to my colleagues. What's your view on journals preventing reviewers from using LLMs to review papers? And if you think that's going to change, because the science platform prevents them at the moment, but I think it's going to move. What do you think?
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so that's a big question. So I agree with the journals preventing reviewers from using ChatGPT or any other large language model to write their review for them. So I think because we can see it hallucinates and it can make mistakes. It always writes almost always writes a plausible report, but it can write a plausible report that is wrong. So if you allow reviewers to just upload a paper to ChatGPT and send the report in, then you won't catch the squirrel surgeon research. And then I think academics will make a mockery of journals that allow it, because they'll submit their squirrel surgeon papers just to catch the journals out. But I think what ChatGPT is good at would be good at in the review process would be providing an additional review of a paper. So not a primary review, that's the job of the humans, but an additional review that the editor could use to cross-check the human reviewers, or if safeguards were put in place, the human reviewers could use to cross-check their own judgment, but they'd have to write their own review first, and then they would be shown the ChatGPT. And then they might spot things that ChatGPT has said that they haven't noticed. So there's one conference that's doing this already, the ICLR, International Conference on Learning Representations. So they have a process where they use large language models to review as well as the human reviewers, but the human reviewers aren't allowed to see the large language model reviews until they've already written their reviews. So I think that's the right way around. So I think it...
Sorry.
Yeah, carry on.
No, it's quite worrying that we throw unpublished data into LLMs.
Yeah. Yeah, so for ICLR, it's... they get permission from the authors, and that's fine. And they also use offline large language model, so it doesn't go into ChatGPT, it goes into a private one. So yeah, I guess, yeah, that's a good point. So the big threat of all this is that if you have a research evaluation task for a review, for a journal, and you upload the paper to ChatGPT, so that's illegal, copyright infringement, obviously. But a lot of people are doing it, I'm sure. And the problem is that ChatGPT does write a really plausible report. So unless the editor is really clued on, then they might not spot that it's actually not a human review. So I've had one review of my paper that's written by ChatGPT, which was, wasn't fun to read. It rejected, it recommended rejecting a paper on ChatGPT. ChatGPT said, no, this is rubbish, and it recommended rejecting. But yeah, so first of all, we have to tell everyone, don't do it because it's illegal, or breach of copyright, and then secondly, it's also not the right thing to do because it has to be first and foremost a human evaluation. And then if you have all the permissions in place, then a second opinion from a large language model could be helpful. Yeah, so that would be my perspective.